3:30 in the morning, Monday, April 20th, 2026, Wellington, New Zealand. The capital city of 440,000 people is asleep when the rain begins in earnest. Not heavy rain in the ordinary sense, something different. Something that Wellington's street drainage networks, its hillside stormwater pipes, its century-old retaining walls, and its geology of steep clay slopes were never designed to absorb. In the time frame, they are now being asked to absorb it. 77 millimeters, 3 full inches of rain, in less than 1 hour, at a single location in the city. Wellington's total average rainfall for the entire month of April is 75 millimeters. The city received more than its entire monthly average in 60 minutes before most of its residents had woken up. By 3:30 in the morning, the phones of Fire and Emergency New Zealand begin to ring. By the time the sun rises on April 20th, the service has already responded to more than 180 calls regarding flooding and landslides across the city. Island Bay, Berhampore, Newtown. Brooklyn, Mornington, the Basin Reserve area. Cars buried in debris on the side of the road in Happy Valley. Meter-high floodwaters rising through the ground floor of the Duckworth-Lewis guest house in the city center, where 35 to 40 residents live, half of them on the ground floor that is now underwater. On Karori South Road, in the southern suburb of South Karori, floodwaters and debris surge through a residential property. A family member calls emergency services at 7 in the morning, unable to make contact with the person staying there. His name is Philip Sutton. He is in his 60s. He is a New Zealand Post employee. As of this broadcast, 2 days after the flood, specialist search teams are still looking for him, and police are urging the public not to join the search themselves because the conditions are still too dangerous. The ground is unstable. The debris is still moving. Philip Sutton has not been found. Wellington's state of emergency, declared by the Wellington Civil Defense Emergency Management Group Chair Anita Baker at 2:30 in the afternoon on April 20th, remains in place across much of the region as of April 22nd. It has been partially lifted in Upper Hutt City, Pororua City, and the Kapiti Coast, but it continues across central Wellington, all of Wairarapa, and the surrounding districts, where damage assessment, building safety checks, and recovery operations are still ongoing. This is the story of what happened, why it happened, what the risk looks like in the hours and days ahead, and what it tells us about the relationship between Wellington's geography, its infrastructure, and the climate that is now producing rainfall events that Victoria University climate change professor James Redwick described in 4 words that need no elaboration. Extreme, even in the tropics. Let us start with the meteorological mechanism, because understanding how this event was generated is the only way to understand why the forecasting community could not give Wellington's residents more warning time, and why the risk of further events remains elevated even as the main rainfall system moves away. The Watcher's analysis, published April 21st, and drawing on Japan Meteorological Agency Himawari, 9 satellite imagery, identified the event's origin with precision. A slow-moving low-pressure system over the Tasman Sea drifted eastward across the northern North Island of New Zealand on Monday and Tuesday. This kind of slow moving low is a particularly dangerous meteorological setup for rainfall extremes, and the reason is straightforward. A fast-moving system produces intense rain over a wide area, but no single location receives rainfall for very long. A slow-moving system sits over the same geography for hours, feeding moisture into the same catchments, and the same urban drainage networks hour after hour without relief. AccuWeather senior meteorologist Jason Nichols described the dynamics precisely in his analysis published this week. The system produced sustained rainfall followed by embedded convective activity, meaning thunderstorms developed within the broader rainfall band, creating localized cells of extreme intensity on top of the already heavy widespread precipitation. Forecast peak rainfall rates from the system as a whole were 15 to 25 millimeters per hour. Within the embedded thunderstorm cells, localized intensities reached 40 millimeters per hour. That is the rate that produced 77 millimeters in 60 minutes at a single Wellington location. Nichols put the 77 millimeter figure in its most stark context. Wellington's average April rainfall is 3 inches, or 75 millimeters. The city received a typical April's worth of rain in a single day on Monday and Tuesday alone. The Watcher's analysis added the critical technical detail that makes the ongoing risks so significant, even. Now that the main system has passed, hazard conditions remain elevated because even small additional rainfall on already saturated ground can trigger further landslides and flooding. Saturated ground does not absorb water the way dry ground does. When the soil is already at or near its field capacity, the maximum amount of water it can hold against, the force of gravity, every additional drop of rain becomes immediate surface runoff. There is no buffer, and Wellington's geology, characterized by steep, clay-rich slopes, has an additional vulnerability. Clay soils, once saturated, can lose their shear strength rapidly, meaning that the bond between the soil mass and the slope below it weakens until the slope fails catastrophically as a landslide. Engineering geologist Carrie Leith, speaking to the Science Media Center, stated this plainly. There's a really good chance of more slips occurring in Wellington because of the intense rain, the hill slopes being wet, and the impact of damage to infrastructure such as retaining walls, stormwater pipes, and footpaths. Infrastructure that was already damaged in the initial event now provides less resistance to subsequent rainfall. The risk compounds. The red heavy rain warnings that Met Service issued for Wellington and Wairarapa on April 20th were downgraded to orange warnings on April 21st as the main rainfall ban moved away. Updated forecasts show additional rainfall of 50 to 70 millimeters in Wairarapa and up to 80 to 110 millimeters in parts of Hawke's Bay, from the same system continuing to move through the region. Hawke's Bay is still experiencing flooding as of this broadcast, with central Hawke's Bay under its own emergency conditions and state highway closures in effect. The Wellington cleanup is proceeding against the backdrop of an atmosphere that has not fully reset. Additional showers are expected on Wednesday local time, according to AccuWeather's Nichols, before dry weather returns for the remainder of this week and allows cleanup efforts to accelerate. Here's the specific human picture of what Monday's flood produced in Wellington, the detail that turns a weather statistic into a lived experience. Between 3:30 in the morning and 11 in the morning on April 20th, fire and emergency. New Zealand responded to more than 180 calls. 180 calls in 7.5 hours. That is one call every 2.5 minutes around the clock for more than 7 hours. Each call represents a flooded home, a blocked road, a landslide, hitting a property, a person in need of rescue. The southern suburbs, Island Bay, Berhampore, Newtown, Brooklyn, Mornington, were hit hardest. Around 10 houses in Berhampore, Mornington, and South Karori are now classified as uninhabitable, according to Wellington City Council. Not temporarily closed, uninhabitable. The people who lived there cannot go back. The Duckworth Lewis Guest House, a 2-story building in central Wellington that houses 35 to 40 residents, was flooded with meter-high water on the ground floor. The residents on the ground floor, those who had not already evacuated, woke to water at chest height rising through their rooms. Damaged cars covered in debris were photographed on the side of a road in the suburb of Happy Valley. The South Wellington Montessori School, an early childhood education center, was flooded with waist-high water. Lead teacher Dana McDonald arrived to find the building contaminated. Carpets, furniture, walls, all of it soaked in floodwater that carries bacteria, sewage contamination, and debris. Quote from McDonald to RNZ, "This is my livelihood, and it's all been taken from us." She said it would take months for the center to be operational again. The school is now looking for temporary premises and contacting its insurance. Everything inside must be ripped out and replaced. The transport picture was equally severe. 28 flights were canceled in and out of Wellington Airport on April 20th, with more cancellations expected on April 21st. All Metlink Harbour ferry services were canceled on Monday and Tuesday. Victoria University of Wellington closed all its campuses until Wednesday morning. Witarea and Welltec also closed. Wellington Zoo, Zealandia, Tamara, Atane, Te Papa, the National Museum of New Zealand, Te Matapihi, the cable car, and multiple libraries all closed. Council sports fields were closed. The Basin Reserve area experienced road flooding that closed lanes on State Highway 2. Riverside Drive in Lower Hutt was closed. Harcourt Wherry Drive was expected to close by 5 p.m. on Monday. State Highway 53 in Sealand. Featherston flooded between Temaree Road and Ward's Line. States of local emergency were also declared in the Manawatu-Wanganui region for the Wanganui District and Ohura wards, as the same system triggered flooding, slips, evacuations, and state highway closures across a much wider area of the lower North Island. The most urgent human story is Philip Sutton. He's in his 60s. He is a New Zealand Post employee. The company's chief operating officer, Brendan Main, confirmed this publicly, expressing sympathy to the family and saying the company was supporting its staff through his disappearance. Sutton's Karori South Road property was struck by floodwaters and debris. In the early hours of April 20th, a family member called emergency services at 7 in the morning when they could not reach him. Police and search and rescue teams spent hours at the property on Monday, clearing debris, but were unable to find him. Abysmal weather hampered the search on Monday. On Tuesday, Inspector Fleur de Bez said police were speaking with his family before reassessing conditions for continued search activities. Police are explicitly urging the public not to join the search independently. The ground in South Karori is still unstable, floodwaters and debris continue to pose serious risks, and amateur searchers could themselves become casualties. Volunteers have nonetheless continued searching in the area, and some have found a bag and a mud-soaked item of clothing near the flood-affected area. As of this broadcast, Philip Sutton has not been found. The state of emergency that remains in place across central Wellington, Wairarapa, and surrounding areas is not ceremonial. It is operational. It grants emergency teams the authority to act quickly. supporting evacuations, managing risks, directing resources, without the bureaucratic processes that normally govern public spending and infrastructure intervention. Wellington Civil Defense Emergency Management Group Chair Anita Baker declared these powers specifically because the situation required immediate, coordinated action across multiple agencies and multiple councils. Those powers are still being used, building safety assessments are still ongoing, damage surveys are still being conducted. The full extent of the destruction will take, according to Wellington City Council's own estimate, several more days to understand. The practical guidance from Wellington Region Emergency Management Office, REMO, and Wellington City Council for residents in the affected areas is direct and should be understood clearly. If you are in a low-lying or flood-prone area, particularly if you have experienced multiple floods in recent years, you should go elsewhere until the all-clear is given. The fact that the main rainfall band has moved on does not mean the slope and landslide risk has resolved. Kerry Leith's warning about further slips from engineering, geology, and sea remains valid. The slopes are wet, the infrastructure is damaged, and small additional rainfall is sufficient to trigger new events. If you see signs of slope movement near your property, cracking in the ground, tilting trees or fence posts, unusual water seeping from the soil, treat. This as an immediate warning sign and leave without waiting for official notification. Do not wait for an alert if you feel you are in danger. That is the exact language of the REMO advisory. Act on your own judgment before the official instruction arrives. For residents whose homes are safe but whose immediate neighborhood has been affected, the practical priorities are: do not enter floodwater or debris-covered areas on foot. Floodwater that looks shallow can conceal holes, drops, moving debris, and contamination from sewage and industrial runoff that poses serious health risks even after the water recedes. If you have been asked to evacuate, the Wellington City Mission, Wakamaru at 4 Oxford Terrace, Mount Cook, remains available as an emergency shelter. If your property has been classified as uninhabitable by Wellington City Council, do not re-enter it without explicit official clearance, even when the flooding appears. To have subsided, structural damage to foundations, retaining walls, and floor systems may make the building unsafe in ways that are not visible from the outside. If your water supply has been affected, or your property flooded with mixed stormwater and sewage, as the South Wellington Montessori School was, treat all surfaces that were in contact with floodwater as contaminated until professionally assessed and cleaned. Boil water advisories may be in effect for some areas. Check with Wellington Water directly for the latest guidance on water safety in your specific suburb. The Wellington flood of April 2026 did not occur in isolation. It occurred in the context of what New Zealand's largest insurer, IAG, described this week in language that should be read carefully by every property owner, every urban planner, and every infrastructure engineer in the country. RNZ published the IAG warning on April 21st, the day after the Wellington emergency. Under the headline, "A storm every 8 days, the country's biggest insurer calls for systemic response." The substance of the IAG warning is this: an increasing number of severe weather events are now happening in New Zealand in spring and summer, and the frequency and intensity of these events requires a systemic response, not individual claims management, not property by property risk assessment, but a structural transformation of how New Zealand builds, where it builds, and how it manages the interface between urban infrastructure and natural hazard risk. Wellington's specific vulnerability to this kind of event is geological and historical. The city was built on steep hillsides and narrow costa L plains that are inherently unstable under extreme rainfall. Its retaining walls, stormwater systems, and drainage infrastructure were designed for the rainfall intensities of the mid-20th century, a climate that no longer exists. The Victoria University climate scientists' characterization of 77 millimeters in 1 hour as extreme, even in the tropics, is technically accurate. Tropical rainfall, in convective zones near the equator, regularly produces intensities at that level. Wellington is 36 degrees south latitude, in the temperate zone, where such intensities were historically rare. They are becoming less rare. The slow-moving low-pressure system that caused Monday's flooding is the kind of atmospheric setup that climate scientists have been documenting as increasingly common in the New Zealand region. Systems that draw moisture from a warmer Tasman Sea and deliver it with an intensity and duration that the city's infrastructure was not built to handle. The recovery timeline for Wellington is measured in months, not days. The South Wellington Montessori School will not reopen in its current premises for months. The uninhabitable houses in Burhampore, Mornington, and South Karori require structural assessment, repairs, and in some cases demolition before their residents can return. The stormwater and retaining wall, infrastructure damaged in the event, must be repaired before the next significant rainfall, and the next significant rainfall is not a remote possibility. It is a certainty in Wellington's climate, and the question is not whether it would all come, but whether the city's infrastructure will be in better condition to handle it when it does. IAG's call for a systemic response is the right framing for what Wellington needs now, not just cleanup, not just insurance claims, a fundamental reassessment of what it means to build and live on Wellington's hillsides in a climate that no longer resembles the one the city was designed for. As of this broadcast, April 22nd, 2026, here is the situation in Wellington. The state of emergency remains in place across central Wellington and Wairarapa. It has been partially lifted in Upper Hutt City, Porirua City, and Kapiti Coast. Specialist search teams are continuing to look for Philip Sutton, the NZ Post employee, missing since Monday morning. The public is urged not to join the search independently. Building safety assessments are ongoing. Additional showers are possible on Wednesday local time before dry weather returns later in the week. Residents in low-lying areas and on or near steep slopes should remain vigilant even as the main system moves away, because the saturated ground continues to pose a landslide risk with even moderate additional rainfall. If you are in Wellington right now, stay informed through Met Service, Remo, Wellington City Council, and RNZ for the latest official updates. Do not re-enter evacuated properties without official clearance. Treat all floodwater contact surfaces as contaminated. Keep children and pets away from affected streams, flood channels, and debris-covered ground. And if you see signs of ground movement near your home, cracks, tilting structures, unusual, water seeping from the soil, leave immediately without waiting for an official alert. Philip Sutton's family is waiting for news. A city of 440,000 people is beginning the slow process of counting the cost. And a question that New Zealand's insurers, planners, and policymakers cannot avoid much longer is sitting in every damaged retaining wall, every contaminated early childhood center, every uninhabitable home on every Wellington hillside that was built in a climate that April 20th, 2026, made clear no longer exists.